Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. No one likes overly shaky video or the vomit-inducing motion sickness it can cause. In this video I'm going to show you how to shoot and edit using gyro stabilization in the Sony a7S III. If you want to see a comparison of all the different stabilization modes, I've already done a video on that and I'll put a link in the description below. This video is organised into 3 sections: what camera settings to use when you're planning to use gyro stabilization, how to use Catalyst Browse to analyse the gyro data and perform the stabilization, and how to apply additional motion blur in post to get the footage looking even better. So stay tuned till the end. So the a7S III can capture gyroscopic data as part of the video recording. This data can be used to stabilise the footage later on. This is different from using something like Warp Stabilizer in post to stabilise the footage, because the actual physical camera movement can be used during the stabilisation process. Warp Stabilizer, on the other hand, has to try and guess what the movement of the camera was. Normally when shooting video, your shutter speed will be roughly double your frame rate. So for 24p you'd be using about 1/48th of a second for your shutter speed. This is to create a pleasing motion blur in the video. If you plan on using gyro stabilization in post, you'll need to shoot at a higher shutter speed to actually reduce motion blur for the stabilization process. For example, this footage was shot at 24 frames per second with a 1/200th of a second shutter speed. This means the footage doesn't look as pleasing to the eye, but later in this video I'll show you a trick on how to add the motion blur back in. If you're planning to use gyro stabilization, you should also turn off stabilization in the camera. So once you've shot your footage with a high shutter speed, you'll need to go and download and install Catalyst Browse from sonycreativesoftware.com. This will let you access the gyro data and stabilize the footage. So here we are in Catalyst Browse. The first thing you're going to want to do is navigate to the folder containing your clips. So I've got this gyro tut folder here. This first clip was shot at 24 frames per second with a shutter speed of 1/50th of a second. So it's going to have the normal amount of motion blur. Also notice these icons here. This tells you that the clip contains some kind of stabilization metadata. So let's go and try and stabilize this first clip. To do this, just click the stabilization button down here. It will analyse the clip and then apply the gyro stabilization. So if I try and play this back, it might be a bit jerky at first. So the version on the right is the version with the stabilization applied in Catalyst Browse. You probably can't see it too well on YouTube, but because we shot it at the regular shutter speed, we're getting a lot of kind of crazy jerky motion. Let's just close this, come back to our clips. This clip, on the other hand, was shot with gyro stabilization in mind, and if we have a look at the metadata down here, it was shot at roughly 1/200th of a second, so a lot faster than 1/50th, so we won't get much motion blur in the clip. If we try and stabilize this version, it's going to look a lot better. We'll have a look at a full screen version in just a minute, but this version, because we shot it at a higher shutter speed, doesn't have the same amount of weird jerky movement. So you can see on the left is the original clip, and on the right is the one with the stabilization added. Notice it's a bit zoomed in. You can tweak this by clicking the manual button here and then choosing a different cropping ratio. So you can zoom all the way out and zoom in a bit. You can play with this to get the right balance of stabilization and cropping. I'm just going to stick with auto for now, and once you're happy with it, come up to the top here and click this what looks like a share button. This will give you some rendering options. You can come down to the bottom here and choose some different transcoding settings. So for example, you can choose from these render presets. Because I shot this video at 100 megabits a second, I'm going to choose to output it at 100 megabits per second. So once you're happy with all those settings, just click export down here, and you can see at the top here it's rendering this clip. So once the footage is rendered, this is what it looks like. Notice that we don't have much motion blur, so it looks a bit unnatural with that soap opera TV effect. We'll go and fix that in just a moment. Before we do, if you like this video so far, go and subscribe to the channel now and click the bell to turn on notifications. So here we are in Premiere Pro with the rendered clip imported into this timeline, and if I just play that, you can see that the clip is now stabilized. Once it gets going, there we go. So we've got the gyro stabilization applied. But notice it does look a bit jarring because we've got no motion blur because of the high shutter speed. So what we're going to do is actually use After Effects to add some motion blur back in. So I'm just going to right click on the clip and choose Replace with After Effects Composition. This will open up After Effects for us. We'll just choose a name for the project. We should see our clip now in After Effects. What we're going to do is come up to the effects and we're going to search for Pixel Motion Blur. We'll grab this pixel motion blur effect and drag it down onto the clip. There's loads of things that you can change here. We've got the option to manually change the shutter angle, shutter samples and vector detail. I'm not going to worry about any of that, I'm just going to leave it as the defaults. Effectively what this is going to do is it's going to add motion blur back into the video. Once you're happy with that, I'm just going to click Save and close After Effects to head back to Premiere Pro. So I'm just going to render this, and here's what it looks like in full screen. And here's a side-by-side with and without the extra motion blur.